A freezing couple with an empty larder and buried baby heard 3 mysterious knocks that would change everything forever.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The wind howled across the Colorado plains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the first bitter promise of what would become the harshest winter anyone in these parts had seen in 40 years. Thomas Callahan stood at the frost-covered window of their small homestead cabin, watching the gray clouds swallow the distant mountains whole. Behind him, his wife Sarah sat wrapped in their only wool blanket, her hands trembling as she tried to thread a needle by the dying light of their single oil lamp. They had been married for 3 years, 2 of which had been spent trying to carve out a life from this unforgiving land. Thomas had brought Sarah here from Boston with promises of prosperity, of building something that would last for generations. She'd believed in him then, and somehow, despite everything, she still believed in him now. But belief could not fill an empty larder. Belief could not mend the hole in their roof, or replace the cow that had died 2 weeks ago. Belief could not stop the consumption that had taken their baby girl 6 months past, leaving Sarah hollow-eyed and Thomas broken in ways he could not name. The drought of summer had destroyed their crops. The fever that swept through the territory had taken their livestock, all except old Bess, the mule who was too stubborn to die. What little money they had saved went to the doctor who could not save their daughter, and now they faced the coming winter with barely enough food to last a month, and no way to get more. Thomas turned from the window and looked at his wife. At 24, Sarah still possessed the delicate beauty that had captured his heart at that church social back east, but grief and hardship had carved new lines around her eyes. Her auburn hair, once always pinned up proper, now hung loose around her shoulders because she no longer had the strength to fuss with it. He crossed the room and knelt before her, taking her cold hands in his. The needle slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor forgotten. "I should have listened to you," he said quietly. "When you said we should go back to Boston before the passes closed, I should have listened." Sarah cupped his face with her thin hand. "We had no money for passage, Thomas, and we have nothing to return to. My family made their feelings clear when I chose to marry you." He pressed his forehead against her palm. "I have failed you, Sarah. In every way a man can fail his wife." "No," she said firmly, lifting his chin so their eyes met. "You loved me when no one else would. You stayed by my side when we buried our Elizabeth. You are still here, Thomas. That is not failure." He wanted to argue, to list all the ways he had broken his promises to her, but the love in her eyes silenced him. Instead, he simply held her hands tighter and prayed to a God he was no longer certain was listening. The knock came 3 nights later. Thomas jerked awake from a fitful sleep, certain he had dreamed it. The fire had died down to embers, and the cabin was freezing. Sarah stirred beside him, her breath visible in the cold air. The knock came again, 3 sharp raps against the wooden door. Thomas reached for the rifle that hung above the bed, checking to make sure it was loaded. Out here, visitors after dark could mean anything from a lost traveler to bandits looking for easy prey. "Who is there?" he called out, his voice rough with sleep. "Just an old woman seeking shelter from the storm," came the reply. The voice was weathered but gentle, like aged leather. "I mean you no harm, young man. I only ask for a place by your fire until morning." Thomas looked at Sarah, who had sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Even in the darkness he could see the question in her eyes. "We have nothing to steal," he said through the door, "and barely enough to feed ourselves." "I am not here to take," the voice answered, "only to share in the warmth of human company on a cold night. Surely you would not leave an old woman to freeze." Sarah touched his arm. "Let her in, Thomas. Whatever she is, we cannot turn away someone in need, not when we know too well what need feels like." Against his better judgment, Thomas unbolted the door. The woman who stood on their threshold was ancient, her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of decades lived hard. She wore a heavy wool coat patched in a dozen places and carried a worn leather satchel over one shoulder. Her eyes, though, were startlingly young, bright blue, and filled with a warmth that seemed to push back the cold. "Thank you kindly," she said, stepping inside. "The name is Ada. Ada Thornwood. And you must be the Callahans. I heard about you down in town." Thomas bolted the door behind her. "What did you hear?" Ada settled herself on the rough wooden bench near the fireplace, setting her satchel beside her. "That you are good people who have had more than your share of sorrow. That you are proud folks who will not ask for help even when they need it most." Sarah approached her, still wrapped in the blanket. "May I offer you some water? It is all we have." Ada smiled, and the expression transformed her weathered face into something almost beautiful. "Sit down, child, both of you. I have not come to take your water." She opened her satchel and began removing items that seemed impossible for the bag to contain. First came a cloth-wrapped package that, when opened, revealed a small ham, cured and fragrant. Then came a jar of preserved peaches, glowing golden even in the dim light, flour, salt, coffee, dried beans, a block of cheese wrapped in wax paper. The items kept coming until the small table was covered with more food than Thomas and Sarah had seen in months. "Where did you get all this?" Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I have my ways," Ada said simply. "Now before you start refusing out of pride, let me tell you something. 40 years ago, I was a young bride, just like your Sarah here. My husband and I came west with nothing but dreams and each other. Our first winter was hard, harder than anything I had ever known. We nearly died, would have died, if a stranger had not come to our door with food and kindness." She paused, looking into the dying embers of the fire. "That stranger asked nothing in return except a promise. She made us swear that when we were able, we would do the same for someone else, that we would pass the kindness forward." Sarah sank onto the bench beside Ada, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We cannot repay you." Ada took her hand. "I am not asking for repayment, child. I am asking for a promise. When you are able, when you have survived this winter and found your footing again, you will help someone else. That is all." Thomas felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked tight since the day they buried Elizabeth. He found himself on his knees before this strange old woman, his pride finally crumbling in the face of such unexpected grace. "We promise," he said. Ada stayed with them that night, and the next after that. What was supposed to be one night of shelter became something none of them could have anticipated. She claimed the small corner near the fire, making herself a bed from blankets she produced from that impossible satchel of hers. During the days, while the blizzard raged outside, Ada taught them things. She showed Thomas how to repair the hole in their roof using materials they already had, pointing out solutions that seemed obvious once she explained them. She taught Sarah recipes that could stretch their food supplies twice as far, and remedies for illness made from roots and herbs that grew wild even in winter. But more than practical knowledge, Ada gave them something they had lost: hope. In the evenings, by the fire that now burned bright with wood Ada seemed to conjure from nowhere, she would tell them stories. Stories of the Old West, of love and loss and survival. Stories of couples who had faced impossible odds and prevailed. And slowly, as the weeks passed, Thomas and Sarah began to remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. One night, as Ada dozed by the fire, Thomas took Sarah's hand and led her outside. The storm had finally broken, and the sky was brilliant with stars. More stars than either of them remembered seeing. The snow stretched out around their little cabin like a blanket of diamonds. "Do you remember the night I proposed?" Thomas asked. Sarah leaned against him. "Under the apple tree in my parents' garden. You were so nervous you dropped the ring twice." He laughed, the first genuine laugh that had escaped his lips in months. "You were so beautiful that night. You are still beautiful, Sarah. More beautiful, because now I know your strength." She turned to face him, and in the starlight, he could see the woman he had married, the woman who had followed him across a continent, who had buried their child beside him, who had never once blamed him for any of it. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Not of dying. I was afraid of watching you give up, of seeing the light go out in your eyes." "Ada saved us," he said. "No," Sarah replied. "Ada reminded us that we could save ourselves, that we still had each other, and that was enough." He kissed her then, deeply, the way he had not kissed her since before Elizabeth died. And when they went back inside, past the old woman who was definite, not as asleep as she pretended to be, they loved each other with a tenderness that spoke of healing, of new beginnings. As winter wore on, Ada became family. She taught Thomas skills he had never learned, skills that would help them not just survive but thrive. She sat with Sarah during the long nights when grief for Elizabeth would creep back in, holding her while she cried, never offering empty platitudes, but simply being present. And somewhere along the way, Thomas and Sarah began to dream again. They talked about the spring, about replanting the fields, about perhaps getting another cow. They even spoke, hesitantly at first, about the possibility of trying for another child when they were stronger, when the grief was not quite so sharp. One morning in late February, Thomas woke to find Ada dressed and ready to leave. Her satchel was packed, and she was standing by the door, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered plains. "You are going," he said. It was not a question. Ada nodded. "The worst of the winter has passed. You have enough supplies to last until spring, and more importantly, you have each other again. My work here is done." Sarah emerged from the back room, having heard their voices. "Stay," she begged. "Stay with us. You are family now." Ada crossed to her and took both her hands. "I have stayed too long already. There are others who need what I can give, just as you needed it. But I will tell you this." She looked at them both, and for a moment, her blue eyes seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. "The love you two share is rare and precious. Life will test it again, as it has already tested it. There will be more hard winters, more losses, more days when giving up seems easier than going on. But remember this night, this winter, this moment. Remember that you survived when survival seemed impossible. And remember that you did not survive alone." She embraced them each in turn, holding them close, like a mother sending her children off into the world. And then, without another word, she opened the door and stepped out into the bright winter morning. Thomas and Sarah stood in the doorway, watching her walk across the snow. And though neither of them would ever speak of it, they would always remember how her footprints seemed to fade even as she made them, until the old woman herself seemed to shimmer and dissolve into the golden sunlight. Spring came early that year, as if to apologize for the brutal winter. Thomas and Sarah planted their fields with seeds they found in the cellar, seeds neither of them remembered buying. Their mule, old Bess, pulled the plow with renewed vigor, as if she too had been touched by Ada's strange magic. By summer, their farm was flourishing. By fall, Sarah was pregnant again, and this time Thomas dared to hope. They named their son Adam in honor of the woman who had saved them, though they changed the spelling because Ada had insisted she was not a saint and did not need to be remembered as one. And when Adam was 3 years old, during another hard winter, a young couple came to their door, desperate and starving, just as they had once been. Thomas and Sarah took them in, fed them, taught them everything Ada had taught them. And before the couple left in the spring, they made them promise to pass the kindness forward. Years later, when Thomas was an old man and Sarah's auburn hair had turned to silver, they would sit on the porch of the large farmhouse they had built and watch their grandchildren play in the fields. And sometimes, in the golden light of evening, Thomas would catch a glimpse of a figure walking along the road, an old woman with a worn satchel and impossibly young eyes. He would raise his hand in greeting and she would wave back, and then she would be gone, continuing on her eternal journey, carrying hope to those who needed it most. "Do you think she was an angel?" Sarah asked him once, her hand in his as it had been for 50 years. Thomas considered the question, watching the sun set over the mountains that had once seemed so threatening. I think she was exactly what she said she was, he finally answered. An old woman who understood that kindness is the only thing worth passing on. That love, freely given, is the only thing that truly saves us. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had survived the worst of times and come out the other side, still holding hands, still believing in each other, still keeping the promise they had made on that frozen night so long ago. And somewhere out there, on a cold road leading to another struggling homestead, Ada Thornwood knocked on another door, carrying hope in her worn leather satchel, ready to save another couple who had not yet learned that they could save themselves.